1971, a truly big night, a big page in Orange Bowl history, as results received from the Cotton and Rose Bowls have put the national championship on the line here tonight. Nebraska's coach, Bob Devaney, has the best one-loss record in college football.
He was tough. He's just like a bulldog. He keeps coming back at you. There's no quitting.
He was very competitive. I mean, there was no doubt that he wanted to win and didn't like to be beaten and knew what it took to win.
The thing that Bob was so great at was inspiring people to achieve. You wanted to do good for Coach Devaney.
It's Jerry Taggy calling signals after a 67-yard march. And on a quarterback keeper, he dives for the goal line, making sure his plunge is across the goal line. Coach Bob Devaney's unbeaten Nebraska Cornhuskers are #1, 1970 National Collegiate Football Champions of America, and perhaps the greatest page in Orange Bowl history.
He was a gruff guy and not a real complimentary guy, but boy, he loved the game. I mean, he loved that game, and he loved building the program, and he loved the athletes. You know, he didn't tell them that, but he did, and you knew it. And it's he really, you know, he impacted your life. He's a good man.
I think Bob had a vision. Bob saw where he was going. You know, he saw that goal. And that element of faith is convincing others to buy that vision. I mean, who better than Devaney to sell them on a dream?
Everybody, and welcome to University of Nebraska football. Well, just like an old shoe, it seems to fit that we greet you the day after Thanksgiving with another Nebraska-Oklahoma football broadcast.
Nebraskans love football. Filled with 76,000 fans, Nebraska's Memorial Stadium becomes the third largest city in the state. Let's go. On Saturday afternoons in the fall, from the cattle ranches of the west to the cornfields of the east, there is one thing that brings the state together in a clear and overwhelming passion.
Nebraska, Orange Bowl, baby.
When Nebraskans yearned to be known for something other than farming and ranching, a feisty Irishman showed them a way to be the best in the world at something besides agriculture.
Between you two guys, if you can't get that weather turned around, there's nobody gonna.
Like an old-time populist politician, Nebraska Athletic Director Bob Devaney is pressing the flesh and conducting pre-game interviews for radio and television. Over the years, the Oklahoma-Nebraska Thanksgiving Showdown has produced many legendary games. But Devaney is almost always asked to talk about what has become known as a game of the century.
20 years ago, almost exactly to the day, it was on Thanksgiving, of course, in 1971. And here it is 20 years later, and if anything, the game has gotten bigger than it was at the time.
Yeah, and the players all get better, and the coaching gets better, and everything. But
and those were Switzer's thoughts, and now for Bob Devaney's thoughts, easily the most popular man in the state of Nebraska. Bob is now the athletic director, but Coach Switzer said that he kept.
This year, Nebraska has won 8, lost 1, and tied 1. And like almost every other year, they are in the hunt for the national championship. But their athletic success isn't just in football. In basketball, they've made the NCAA tournament the last 2 years. In gymnastics, they always seem in contention for national honors. The women's volleyball team has played for the national championship. Nebraska has achieved a remarkable record in almost every sport, and the Nebraska fans have loved it. The one man most responsible for this success is Bob Devaney. As athletic director, he has taken the university's overall sports program to national prominence. But his first passion was, and is, football.
We got a break there. Ooh.
Gundy takes the ball, gives to Gaddis. Gaddis over the top.
Oh, for Christ's sake.
Got in there. Touchdown.
He just busts right up the middle. This is a big play right here. A big play.
Nebraska down by 1. Snap to Keefer. And he gives to Jones. Huge hole. Inside the 10 to 5. Touchdown. 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 The Nebraska Huskers, 80 yards right in your face. The goalposts are down. They're coming down. It's over. Nebraska wins the game. Nebraska wins the game.
That's the official letter inviting you to be our participant for the Big 8 Championship in Orange Bowl.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll look forward to being down there.
We're looking forward to having you down there.
Get your souvenir edition, 35 cents. 35 cents.
Trickle, trickle, splash, splash, tell me how long will this rain last? The rain keeps dropping, there ain't no stopping. Tell me how long will this rain last?
Cappy, good to see you. Great to see you. Robert, good to see you. Do you think that we could all have a drink together?
I think we could.
All right, let us do that. Miss Phyllis, go ahead.
Bob is a legend in the state of Nebraska in his own time. There's no question about it. And I was watching him just a little bit ago. He was staring at his glass of water, and he was trying to decide whether to walk on it or part it.
Telegram. Received a telegram today. Dear Bob, congratulations. You have become our #1 customer. Signed, J.P. Witherspoon, President and Chairman of the Board of the Seagram's Distilling Company.
I think that's the most appropriate song that could be sung before an auction like this. And it just goes something like this. And as they started, "'Tis better to give than to receive. Yes, indeed. 'Tis better to give than to receive. Much better if you want to be forgiven and know the joys of living. 'Tis better to give than to receive." Now do it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
As comfortable as Bob Devaney may seem dancing at the country club, he did not grow up surrounded by wealth and privilege. He was born into a working-class Irish family in Saginaw, Michigan in 1915.
I know I didn't like to be dressed this way, but at that age, you don't do much about it. My mother was a very fine person. She was a very intelligent woman. She was able to teach the three of us boys. She knew a lot about almost everything and conveyed her ideas very well. My dad was a pretty good singer. He was a pretty strong, active man, and people didn't monkey with him much. He was well respected in various ways. We used to put the boxing gloves on. My dad had kind of helped me on that. So I knew a little bit about it, and I was fairly successful at it. I didn't get beat up much. I didn't get in a lot of fights where I got hurt badly or where I hurt anybody else too badly.
When he graduated from high school in 1933, even though he was smaller than most of his classmates at 145 pounds, he had lettered in basketball, baseball, and football. It was in the middle of the Great Depression. Jobs were hard to find. But his softball skills got him a job at the Chevrolet Iron Foundry and a place on the company team. He only made 50 cents an hour, and when work was slow, he would be laid off. Then he and his friends would sometimes ride the rails, looking for work. One week, he was thrown in jail in Americus, Georgia for jumping a passenger train. And then again later in the week in Saginaw, Michigan, for fighting in a high school brawl.
I had about enough of that jail business from that time on, and I think it probably helped me to try to be a little better citizen from there.
While Devaney was out of work in Michigan and without much direction in life, out on the Great Plains, a rural, thinly populated farm state was pursuing a passion that would one day sweep Devaney to national prominence. The state was Nebraska. The passion was football. Nebraska was continuing a winning tradition that began before the turn of the century. In its first 40 years, it had 37 winning seasons, beating the likes of Notre Dame, Michigan, and Pittsburgh.
Nebraska waiting for the snap. The fullback takes the ball, breaks to the line. Oh, the Cornhuskers almost broke into us that time.
In 1941, the Cornhuskers' winning ways took them to the Rose Bowl, where they played Stanford in front of 92,000 fans. To this day, still the largest crowd ever to watch a Nebraska game. Nebraska led most of the game until the third quarter, when Stanford's Pete Kometovic returned a punt 39 yards for a touchdown. From that play on, Nebraska's next 2 decades would be mostly downhill. During the next 21 years, they would have only 3 winning seasons. But something was starting to happen to a young man in Michigan that would change Nebraska football forever. A friend at the Iron Foundry knew Devaney's athletic ability, and he took him to see the football coach at nearby Alma College. Devaney got a scholarship and began to find new direction in life.
I enjoyed going to Alma, and that's where I met Phyllis. We were forced to go to chapel at these church schools, and so I used to see her in chapel and just kind of look at her and smile at her now and then, and finally I think I got enough nerve up to ask her if she'd like to go out some evening. We started going together then, and we were married, I think, at the end of our freshman year. One year we were in a composition class where you did quite a bit of writing. And I remember one time she wrote a term paper and I copied it word for word and handed it in, and I got a better grade on it than she did.
At Alma, Devaney played left end. He was all conference his junior and senior years. He was also popular, being elected team captain his last 2 years. And he continued to pursue his love of boxing.
I enjoyed hitting people. I didn't like to get hit, but I enjoyed the physical contact of boxing. The idea is being able to beat somebody else up, and boxing gave you that opportunity. If you lose too many times, then certainly it's not much fun.
When he graduated, he knew he wanted to coach football. he began working his way up through the ranks of Michigan high schools. Big Beaver, Keego Harbor, Saginaw. By 1946, he reached Alpena High School on Thunder Bay. There he met the basketball coach and assistant football coach, Jim Ross. They would become lifelong friends.
Well, I wasn't, I guess, that impressed with it when I first met him. You want to be honest with it. I noticed he's a fiery coach. He figured you had to be about half mad to play football, and he got them half mad, and they practiced hard and they played hard. And that was just the kind of coach Bob was.
Jim was always the same. Things didn't bother him all that much. I mean, he was your friend, he was your friend, and you know, he just was a good, solid person. Jim has been always a very steadying influence. He's got worlds of common sense. I'd do some foolish things, and he'd sort of shake his head, but he never really told me how dumb I was.
We never hesitated. Anytime we wanted to drink a beer in Alpena, to go in the bar and have one.
Yeah, if you didn't go in the bars now and then, people thought you were stuck up. Thought that you didn't like the community.
And sometimes we stayed there and played shuffleboard longer than we should have, and we got in trouble when we got home. If you talk to a lot of people in Alpena today and you'd say, I saw Bob Devaney the other day, they say, you mean the Duke? They call him the Duke in Alpena because Bob, and I gotta be careful what I say here, he never would go out and look for a fight, but he never backed down from one either. Bob never did like to lose at anything, believe me. We had weight-losing contests. If you lost, you had to take the other one out for dinner. That meant, in those days, that probably cost you, to take somebody out for dinner, it cost you $4 or $5. And I remember one night, Maureen and I went over to Phyllis's and Bob's for supper. And Phyllis was in the kitchen. I says, where's Bob? He says, oh, he's around, he's around. And finally, I said, Phyllis, I got to go to the bathroom. She says, you can't go in there now. I said, why? She says, well, Bob's in there. I said, what is he doing? He was in the bathroom. He had all the steam turned on the shower and was running in there trying to lose weight because we were going to weigh in later on that night. There again, he had to win. And he did. He just wants to win. He's like a dog that gets a bone and won't let go of it. And that's just the way he is. He will not let go of it. He's got something on his mind, whether it's important or not, it stays on his mind.
Devaney's hard work and competitive nature was recognized by another Irishman named Duffy Daugherty. Duffy was an assistant coach at Michigan State, but soon to become head coach. He helped Devaney get his first college coaching job. It was the beginning of another lifelong friendship.
Bob had got to know Duffy by taking kids down to Michigan State on weekends, and they really hit it off. And they are so similar in their mannerisms, their philosophy, and everything else. Duffy and Bob could be twins. They both liked to have a beer now and then. They both liked to play golf. And they both were crazy about football. If there ever was an Irishman, it was Duffy Daugherty.
Duffy Daugherty was one of these people that was not only a successful coach, he was also a politician. Again, in the best sense of the word, in that he enjoyed being around people, great storyteller, recognized the need that his program had for support. You know, Bob's never come right out and said this, but I think watching Duffy Daugherty work that aspect of the program gave Bob some of the ideas that he used when he came here.
Duffy is a loyal person. He was a very loyal person, and if he's your friend, he's your friend. Duffy was great in inspiring the players and coaches that worked for him or played for him. In practices, he'd let the assistants run the practice, and Duffy would walk around, talk to people and that. But when it come to game day, there was no better coach than Duffy. Bud Wilkinson used to say about Duffy, he's the greatest recruiter since Jesus Christ. He could go into a kid's home and he'd not only sell the kid, but he'd sell the parents. Duffy worked well with mothers. Duffy, you know, he'd sit around and tell them how beautiful they were. And he had that way with the ladies. They all liked Duffy. He like a leprechaun. That's what I used to think Duffy, they used to regard him as sort of a leprechaun. The guy that I owe my coaching career and my whatever success was Duffy Daugherty.
Duffy Daugherty was instrumental in getting Devaney his first head coaching job in college football. In 1956, at 42 years of age, when most head coaches are starting to think about retirement, Bob Devaney was going to Wyoming. Like Duffy Daugherty, Bob Devaney believed in being loyal to his friends.
I'm going to go to Wyoming. I want you to go with me. I said, Bobby, what do you want me? I'm 42 years old. He said, I'm 42 also, he said. But I said, that's different. You get yourself some young guys. And he said, no, I want you to come with me. So we went to Wyoming. And when we got out there, Bob hired John Melton and Carl Selmer, who was a high school coach in Wyoming. So we actually had, of the 6 guys on the staff besides Bob, 4 were from high school. And Bob has always said that he wouldn't hire a coach that didn't coach in high school.
I was coaching high school football in Thermopolis, Wyoming. And I got a telegram from Bob Devaney. Bob came by the high school, and of course everybody was all excited. And we went down to our coffee room at that time was down in the basement. It was almost like the janitor's room, and where the teachers used to go to smoke. And Bob was sitting there, and I remember noticing he had some spots on his tie where I knew what he had for breakfast, but I was a little nervous, but he set me at ease right away. We just got talking. He had that Irish wit about him, you know, and he is a charmer. He really is, and I must have really done a good job on him because he hired me.
The year before Devaney arrived, Wyoming was undefeated. The fans' expectations were high. At the end of Devaney's first year, the Cowboys had only won 4, lost 3, and tied 3. Their final loss was to arch-rival Denver, 14-13. To make matters worse, Devaney wound up in front of a judge after a fight between a hotel detective and one of his players named Murator.
We went before the magistrate. He said, I think this is kind of an unfortunate thing that happened. And he said, I would just say, go ahead, we'll just let it go and just don't get in any trouble again while you're here. And this cop that Murator had thrown down, he's whoop, he says, I just don't let them all go but this guy. And he points at Murator. Then I made a very classic statement. I says, if he stays, we all stay. And we did. First year there, we ended up with a poor season, rather, and then in jail. So that could have ended a coaching career right there. But Dr. Humphrey saved that one for us. They asked him, he says, are you going to fire these guys? He says, hell no. He said, they were just protecting their players.
The next year, Devaney's team won 8 and lost 3. The people in Wyoming were starting to believe in Devaney.
The second year we were made. We not only won, but a lot of the players were Wyoming kids. Now, right away, the coaches and the people were on our side. Boy, they're going to play Wyoming kids. Well, that's fine if you play and win them, but if you play Wyoming kids and lose, they'll dump you just as quick.
You know, in recruiting, Bob's theory always was, you know, get the best out of your home state. because that's where you build your nucleus, on your home state kids, and we did.
When Bob left Wyoming, he was every bit as popular as he'd ever been in Nebraska. He could have been governor or anything he wanted to do.
Across the border in Nebraska, the Cornhuskers had suffered through 17 losing seasons in 21 years. They were looking hard for a new coach. They asked Duffy Daugherty for advice. He recommended an old friend, the head coach at Wyoming. The race for head coach was intense, but Devaney got the job. His first challenge, however, would not be coaching football. First, he had to win back the state's disillusioned fans.
If you read descriptions of Devaney in Sports Illustrated, one of the phrases they used to describe Devaney is always kind of old-time evangelist. And they talk about, Bible-thumping evangelist. And what Devaney was selling was not only football, but Americanism, loyalty, to be a good, clean American boy and to salute the flag and so on, somehow was tied into also playing football. And playing football also was tied into being in Nebraska. Being in Nebraska was tied into being an American. Bob managed to sell it that way. He was saying to Joe and Mary Nebraskan, you're important. You count. You may be out here in Minden, but you're important. You're important. You're as important as the folks down in Lincoln and so on.
When Devaney got to Nebraska, people were looking for some reason to feel good. They wanted a change. They wanted an enthusiastic new blood, new life for a football program. And Bob provided that.
So I asked John to send down a group of freshmen, and he set me down 11 of the biggest, fattest, slowest kids he had, see?
Bob was the genial Irishman, and he'd tell funny stories and that sort of thing, and you had a feeling, kind of a gut feeling that it might be fun with Bob.
Well, now I don't like to try to pass the blame on, but you can see that with these fellas out there to practice, even as fine a kicking coach as I am, there can be some problems.
One person said to me that if you went to a cocktail party or a reception with Bob Devaney and stayed a half an hour and there were 200 people there, everyone would swear they had a drink with Bob Devaney. He really worked the crowd. He knew the importance of that. And so what he made people feel, even if you got to Scotts Bluff and talked to them, he made the people feel like they were really part of the team, that they needed the team and the team needed the state. I think with Bob Devaney, there was always that feeling that what I see is what I'm getting.
Coach, when you put your team on the field at Nebraska, what type of a boy do you want playing football for you?
Well, we like a big, fast, tough kid who likes to hit people. By tough,
There's just an innocence about the man. Innocence in the sense of openness. I'm Bob Devaney, here's what I'm selling you. If you want to buy it, I'll tell you why you should buy it.
This type of boy we'd like, and also I might add we'd like a boy who has a good amount of intelligence, because football is not just a game of brawn or muscle, it is also a game of brain. And so we like a combination of quite a few things. We don't always get that combination, but that's what we aim for.
Get up, Walter. Get up, Walter. Hurry up. Move. Get up. Get up. Get up.
Once Devaney began to win the support of the fans, he knew his next challenge would be to win the confidence of the players, who had been disillusioned by long practices in previous years.
We used to practice 3 hours, 3.5 hours, and scrimmage a half hour, twice a week before the games. And Bob, being,
pretty astute guy, found out we didn't like that a lot, and one of the first things he said, guys, we're going to practice an hour and a half, we're going to practice hard, but there'll be no scrimmaging during the week. And I mean, the place just lit up. And so he got us on his side right away. But that was the first meeting, and it was very positive. We loved him right away.
And there was always humor in our practice. You know, like, for instance, at the end of the practice, Bob he calls them all in together, and he might tell them a story or something. Or he'd say, hey, go take a couple laps around Don Bryant and go on in. You know, things like that. And it'd break up the kids, and they always left on a high note.
But calling off practice 15 minutes, half hour early, something like that, wow, it just made your day. But you paid for it the next day, and you knew you were going to, but it's all right. You know, it was worth it.
The players began to respect Devaney as a coach, but he still had to convince them that they could win. He saw that one of the first games was against perennial powerhouse Michigan. He also saw that Michigan wasn't as good as in past years. Devaney had a plan.
The key to Bob's first year had to be the Michigan game. Playing at Michigan anytime is tough. That big stadium and that tunnel where they run you down that tunnel and there's no way out except to fight.
That was a very critical game for Bob because, number one, he was going home. But number two, he felt if he won that game, it was a critical game, then we would believe in ourselves. And he pushed extra hard.
Nebraska went on to beat Michigan 25-13. The players were starting to believe.
Once you've won, it's easy to win again. But convincing these kids that they could win the first time was the tough part.
Bob somehow let us know that we could win. And we did it. He was good. It was fun.
The fan record led to Big 8 Coach of the Year honors for Bob Devaney in his first year with the Huskers, and Player of the Year recognition for quarterback Dennis Clary. Nebraska one of 3 Big 8 teams to play.
We were 8-2, and everybody thought that was a great year. Well, then came the chance to get the Gotham Bowl. Nebraska hadn't been to a bowl game since the 1955 Orange Bowl. And this was pretty exciting. Well, came time for the game, and everybody goes out to Yankee Stadium, and I think when the team got there, we doubled the crowd. I was in the locker room when Bob said, I do want to, I feel kind of bad about this whole deal. This whole scene reminds me a lot of when I was a kid back in Michigan. And he said, we used to have those old back alley fights, and he said, there wasn't anybody there to watch us, but the toughest son of a buck won. And they all laughed and went out on the field, and that's about what happened. It was a fantastic football game, but Nebraska was just a little tougher. It was very, very bitter cold, but a tremendous victory. And, of course, that really capped off the first year and made Devaney a statewide hero. And from then on, it just got better.
I think if you did a statewide poll in 1962, the most Nebraskans would hope for was a competitive team that wouldn't embarrass us, because we had been embarrassed in the 50s. So to go to the Gotham Bowl, I mean, that was beyond your wildest dreams. The Nebraska fan thought he was there. This is great, we're winning. But Devaney knew he wasn't there. Bob had bigger dreams than most Nebraskans had. I think Bob felt he probably could win a national championship, or at least would have a fair shot at winning a national championship, where I think that was beyond the dreams of most Nebraskans.
The next year, Nebraska went 10-1, beating Oklahoma 29-20 to win the conference championship.
The championship for the Huskers was the first in 23 years. Coach Devaney and his staff, now after 2 years, had run the record to 18 wins and 3 defeats. An almost unbelievable record, and certainly one that far surpassed the dreams of even the most ardent fan. To make the understatement of the year, it had been a great season for Nebraska.
Watch this, it's a big one for Nebraska. The Cornhuskers' great quarterback, Dennis Claridge, going all the way for a touchdown on the second play of the game.
In 2 short years, Devaney had taken a lackluster program and brought it to national prominence. But he didn't do it alone.
Bob was, the boss, and he was the leader, but he also delegated. I mean, he had very good faith and trust in those guys, and they'd been together a long time. They'd been together at Wyoming, and everybody knew everybody's role and everybody's personality. And John Melton was the funny guy, and Jim Ross was the needler and the old sage, and Mike Corrigan was the gruff guy image, and Carl Selmer was the brilliant aeronautical engineer who wanted to be a football coach, and everybody had a different personality, but they melded together so well and meshed. Everybody knew what everybody else could do, and they had fun together. The families were close, and they'd party together. We'd win or lose, and we'd go to the Legion Club and get a table and get something to eat, and everybody was kind of one big happy family, and it was a fun time.
Immediately after a game, we'd go there to eat, and he'd make sure their wives were with us. We'd sit together, and the music would take up, and he loved to dance and greet everybody. They'd all come to say, what a great game and so forth, and he naturally loved that. Our wives were very, very good friends, real close friends, and I'm afraid the Legion was quite a hangout for us.
Bob Devaney's life involved a lot of play. Bob knew how to have fun. Bob knew how to relax. He got a sense of joy from what he did. It was not only fun to do, but it also gave him a sense of accomplishment to do what he did. Bob, I think, taught a lot of these young men that life could be fun. I think that in the early 60s, it was still possible to have fun. We didn't have back then weight training programs. We didn't have off-season conditioning. So there was much less emphasis on it, much less focus on it. And I think that gave the players more time to be 18, 19, 20 years old.
What's your favorite salad?
Red Jello.
Red Jello.
They all like red Jello.
And French fries seem to go pretty handy.
Oh, yes. Yes, French fries and hamburgers, that's what they like.
And if you talk to players who played for him in '63, they talk about having fun with Bob, that he would giggle, that he knew when to laugh, and he wasn't afraid to laugh. And so I think it's possible to be successful, but it's also possible to have fun while you're moving along that road towards success. And that's not a bad lesson to take along either.
A happy Nebraska fan celebrates.
Well, with the season we had last year, Jack, I would say that the chances to improve or the chances of other people getting season tickets are going to be pretty slim.
Bob had made a very successful football team based on kind of what Sports Illustrated used to call solid Midwestern conservatism. We were basically a running team. We passed, but big linemen, big backs, and we're just going to beat you into the ground and run over you, and by the end of the game, we're going to be out on top. And this was the kind of football that Michigan State played. This is the kind of football that Bob was comfortable with. So Bob had that philosophy and recruited to fill it. And as I say, by '64, we had that kind of team. which was a successful team. But the rest of the country was moving in other directions.
Suddenly and incredibly, at 8 p.m. New Year's night 1966, through a rare combination of last-minute upsets in football, the stage was set for deciding college football's 1966 national championship. Coach Paul Bryant's Alabama Crimson Tide, winner of the 1964 crown, faced Coach Paul Devaney's Nebraska Cornhuskers, king of Big 8 football.
Playing against a smaller and quicker Alabama team, Devaney started to realize that Big 8 up-the-middle power football wasn't all that was needed to compete nationally. After an undefeated season, Nebraska went on to lose the national championship to Bear Bryant's Alabama 39-28.
The winner, the Crimson Tide of Alabama. Again, the country's national champion and king of the college gridiron.
This day, over 65,000 fans, the most to ever watch a game between two Big 8 teams, filled Memorial Stadium to see the Huskers, coached by Bob Devaney, the nation's leading coach with a winning mark of over 80%.
In 1966, Nebraska again had a great season, going 9-1 and headed for the 1967 Sugar Bowl, where Devaney was about to learn more from Alabama's Bear Bryant.
Paul Bear Bryant calls Bob and says, hey, you know, we ought to get together in the Sugar Bowl.
He said, well, Bob, old friend, he says, we had a great game last year. And I says, well, yeah.
We had such a good time when our people liked your people and your people liked how we ought to get together in the Sugar Bowl.
And he said, you know, the two fine teams we got this year, he said, I don't think the Orange Bowl wants us back, but the Sugar Bowl down there in New Orleans is every bit as good of a bowl game, and they really want us. That'll give you a chance to get even.
So we went to the Sugar Bowl, and Bear thumped us pretty good down there, 34-7.
Get that beat out of us.
Kenny the Snake Stabler keeps the ball. Sweeps left end, 14 yards for the touchdown.
Alabama was a smaller team. What we had was size. What Alabama had was quickness. And they just simply out-quicked us, to use a sports term. And Devaney recognized that. You know, and so he came back from that bowl game convinced that we had to build up some team speed.
That's the end of the game. The final score, Alabama 34, Nebraska 7. Coaches Devaney and Bryant meet after the game.
I can remember that like it was yesterday. They went to the Orange Bowl, went to Cotton Bowl, went to Sugar Bowl. Things were rolling along real good. I guess there should be a lesson for anybody. And I don't know if we didn't work as hard, or we didn't coach as hard, or we just didn't have as good a kids as we had for a while. I'm sure that was part of it.
Then we got to thinking we were great coaches, that maybe we didn't have to work as hard. I think we forgot that you got to have good players to win.
I suppose the lowest point that I can recall was the Kansas State game.
The homecoming game with Kansas State was a nightmare, from the weather to the way the game went for the Huskers.
They came up to Lincoln on homecoming and shut Nebraska out 12-0. I'm going down through the West Stadium and some guy hollers, Bryant, U-S-O-B, how you going to explain this one away? So, you know, if they're mad at the old publicity director, you know what they're thinking about the coaches. I mean, those were tough days.
Tom Osborne and I sat in the press box till everybody left. There was a guy in Omaha that started a petition to fire us, you know. I signed the thing. We were terrible coaches at that time.
And when the game wound up, I think the only people who were in the stadium were the coaches and the players. I never had seen people react. They were just flabbergasted that we would lose to Kansas State. And I'm sure that we were fired several places around town that night.
There was a lot of pressure brought to bear on Bob after that. You were hearing things like, well, it's passed him by, the game, he's too old, the game's passed him by, and he's got to modernize. And, you know, I mean, it's the same everywhere with every coach and every generation. But there was pressure brought to bear by the administration. Some of the regents wanting to fire some assistant coaches, and he refused, and there were threats of no pay raise and this and that and the other thing. I mean, it was not a happy time.
The people in Nebraska felt jilted. You know, if you want to use an analogy, I mean, Bob had taken him to what they thought was the top. You know, he had taken him to playing for the national championship and so on, and now all of a sudden we weren't winning. We were getting pushed around. I mean, we were winning, but we weren't winning the way we had all of a sudden in 3 years had become accustomed to winning. And the fans were perhaps less tolerant than Bob would have hoped. He worried. He didn't know how much longer he had at Nebraska.
I didn't want to go back working in the foundry. I wasn't sure I could get my job back anyway.
And Oklahoma won the ball game 47-0 to hand the Huskers their worst defeat under coach Bob Devaney.
In 1968, Devaney's problems weren't just on the football field. Dramatic changes were taking place across the country. In college football, tensions were rising between black players and white coaches. When the black players requested a meeting, Devaney was willing to listen.
I mean, it was that openness, and again, in terms of completely diffusing the situation, how do you get upset with someone who comes in and says, okay, tell me what I'm doing wrong. I'll be glad to change if I can.
Devaney just demonstrated an unwavering support, which said, you know, you're not here being exploited. It is a two-way street. You are playing football, but I promise you, you will get an education. And if you get an education, you will leave here more valuable than when you came.
People like Dick Davis and Mike Green, they talk about Bob Devaney not having a prejudiced bone in his body. You know, that they didn't know whether they were white or black or what have you. I mean, Bob treated them like football players.
Devaney wanted to win. Win with black athletes, white athletes, no matter what. He wanted to win.
One of the things that really impressed me about Bob Devaney was his willingness to change or innovate or recognize when something wasn't working. Bob saw where he was going. You know, he saw that goal, and that element of faith is convincing others to buy that vision. Devaney always believed in himself, and so therefore, if I change my football philosophy, I have to be right. So in the space of one generation of college players, 4 years, Bob changed almost his entire offensive philosophy. And there aren't too many men, I think, too many football coaches at Bob's age who would be willing to do that. Remember, this is when Tom Osborne comes in, too, as offensive coordinator. And Tom favored a much more open offense. You know, and Bob, as you progress through the 60s, Bob kept giving Tom more and more freedom in designing the offense.
Osborne was taking on more responsibility, but it was clear that Devaney's intensity was still driving the team.
I can remember one day he was really, really angry, and I was looking, and Mike Corrigan was a pretty tough guy. You know, he's our backfield coach, and I looked around for Mike, and here Mike is sitting up in the end zone, smoking his pipe, and he had gotten so frustrated with Bob jumping on these guys that he just went up in the stand and started smoking his pipe, and of course all the other coaches were down there. But it's the only time I can ever remember a coach leaving the field. But like I said, then Bob, you know, 30 minutes later, he was joking and laughing around with the guys, and it was all over. And but he could get intense.
Tom, I found, had this real fine offensive mind, and I was not one inclined to throw the ball. I was, you know, I'd come from a school where you jam it down their throat, and I'd get some idea as far as throwing the ball from him. Tom was more of a pass-oriented at that time. But it's easier when you're an assistant coach to throw the ball when you're head coach. You get more conservative as you get to be head coach.
Osborne, true to Devaney's new vision, began to develop an offensive scheme that would combine quickness and speed with Nebraska's traditional power. But before the strategy could be effective, they had to get the right players.
The most important thing the coaching staff can do is recruit well.
He related to the kids. The kids felt at ease with Bob when he was recruiting them. You know, you come in, here a high school kid come in to meet the head football coach, he's sort of nervous, and anyway, hey, they were with Bob 2 minutes, and they were laughing and giggling and telling stories and everything. It was a friendly atmosphere.
Always get the mothers. If you don't have the mother on your side, I'm telling you, it's hard to believe, but you'll never get the kid. How many times have you seen a guy on the sideline say, "Hi, Dad"? Huh? And I did such a good job on a mother one time. She graduated from Nebraska. Yeah, her son played for Colorado. Her mother graduated from Nebraska.
One of Bob's greatest strengths was winning over the parents. Bob always kind of cemented the better players with the personal visits. And player after player talks about how it was the parents. You know, well, gee, I wasn't sure I wanted to go to Nebraska, but after my parents talked to Bob Devaney, I was going to Nebraska.
He had a tremendous ability to flirt, and flirt very well. And my mom really liked him as an individual. Now, again, that flirting is not what I call malicious flirting, but the fact that he also knew how to be able to say to not only to athletes, "God, you're a great athlete," but also he was able to say to moms and brothers and families, "God, you're a great family," and make people feel real good about themselves.
For some players, if you can convince them of the dream and you're the player I need to make that dream happen, well, boy, you know, I'll sign on the dotted line. And that's what Devaney did. Devaney articulated very well how he could see player A, player B, what have you, fitting into this dream of his. And, you know, Devaney had that gift, so you could kind of close your eyes and see yourself out there in Memorial Stadium, and here we go.
By 1969, Devaney had a new offense and faster players. The program was starting to turn around. Devaney had the elements for greatness. But like in 1962, he had to make the players believe in themselves.
He had the uncanny ability to determine, you know, just what players, you know, needed the kick, what players needed the talk, what players needed the stroke, maybe the shove. He was very adept and very astute in that regard, you know, street smart in how to treat people.
He was the first one, besides my mother, that really instilled confidence and made me realize that I had some real good abilities. There was a time during my senior year I was playing, and I had a hell of a time holding the ball. I was, you know, fumbling, and I think about the second or third play from scrimmage, I took the ball and into the line and fumbled it, and they recovered the fumble. And the crowd was booing, and they were booing me. we won the game, but after the game, I was in the locker room, I was getting dressed. And he just come over to me, and I was co-captain. He said, you're my fullback, and you're my co-captain. He said, you're going to play, and you're going to start. And that was all he had to say. He didn't have to say another word to me the rest of the whole season, you know, and that's all he had to say.
I think any person that's worth a damn has got to believe in themselves. If they don't believe in themselves, nobody else in the world is.
Now Taggy throws to co-captain Mike Green. And Green carries it into the end zone, standing up for the touchdown. The final score as Devaney wins his 100th game, Nebraska 17, Iowa State 3. Football entered the 1970s, hope sprang eternal in the fans and coaching staff. Little did they realize just how good a football team they would have. It was felt by all that the offensive unit could be one of the finest ever in Nebraska football history.
Went down to Lawrence, and we were behind 20-10. I caught an 80-yard touchdown pass from Van, and I remember thinking, you know, here we are down 20-10 in the middle of the second quarter, and nobody's nervous. I wasn't nervous. Nobody was nervous. Nobody was concerned. And we won 41-20.
I think that when you talk about Devaney's national championships, and I think Bob will tell you, I mean, you have to be ready. And Nebraska was ready. You've got the players, you've got the Taggies and the Rogers and what have you. You've got the schedule. There's a tremendous amount of luck. But, you know, it's that prepared swimmer that's ready to take advantage of the wave that's throwing him forward, and that was what Bob Devaney was.
And on the last play of the game, the whole season undefeated, riding on this play, Mildred goes back to pass. The ball is tapped down in the end zone several times before it's picked off by Jim Anderson in the end zone. Anderson knows it's all over. He heads out of bounds, gives that football a heave, and Nebraska has gone undefeated in the 1970 football season.
Here is the magic city of Miami, football capital of the nation, now silently and majestically awaiting the eruption of college football's Glamour Classic.
The memorable thing to me about that was the pregame. And we're on the bus going to the game now, and we're still waiting to hear the final results of the Rose Bowl and all that. And the bus stopped at one point, and there was kind of a long wait in traffic. And I remember little Eddie Perriard's a middle guard, jumped up in the aisle and he said, "Let's get the damn bus moving, let's go." You know, just sitting there, the tension was really building.
And I thought that Eddie Perriard was going to kill his bus driver if he didn't get this thing parked and let him out of this bus, because he was ready to play right. If he'd had his helmet on, he'd have gone right through the window.
And we got in the locker room before they went out for the kickoff, and there's absolutely pandemonium in that locker room. Guys are yelling and cheering, and we're number one, before the game was played. I mean, they're really, and Bob's trying to quiet them down. He's, hold it down, you guys. And he got them down. He said, "Hey, guys, we got a football game to play." And they're hollering, "No sweat, coach, we got them. We're number," I mean, it was really a dramatic moment.
New Year's night, 1971, a truly big night, a big page in Orange Bowl history, as results received from the Cotton and Rose Bowls have put the national championship on the line here tonight. Yes, you are seeing double. And it's quarterback Jerry Taggy who's in for a great night.
Behind the passing and rushing of Jerry Taggy, the Cornhuskers jumped out to a 10-0 lead. But LSU came right back with 12 unanswered points to put Nebraska behind going into the fourth quarter. It was the first time in the season Nebraska had been behind in the final period.
We needed the touchdown. It was 12-10. Bring them on. We won. LSU, I think, had only given up 2 rushing touchdowns all year long. And they were very, very tough on goal line. Reviewing the films, I've been over my mind many, many times on a quarterback sneak. I was going to step to the right, dive in a line, and then after they penetrated, stick the ball over. I've been through that in my mind dozens of times. So when the situation came in the game, it was a deja vu.
It's Jerry Taggy calling signals after a 67-yard march. And on a quarterback keeper, he dives for the goal line, making sure his plunge is across the goal line. And it's 17-12, the final score and victory for the Cornhuskers of Nebraska. And pandemonium, Cornhusker style, invades the gridiron.
I was bawling like a baby. There were more than a few guys pretty emotional in the locker room. I must have hugged, 50 guys. I mean, everybody was hugging everybody else, and coaches were hugging each other, and guys were hugging coaches, and the place was going crazy. Helmets were flying all over everywhere. People were jumping up and down. I mean, it's just like you would envision, a real, unbelievable scene. That was it. That was the pinnacle of my career, was that touchdown right there. And I knew it was a big deal because it was on the placemats at Valentino's the next week, so I knew it was a big moment. So.
The Black's wording is as follows. The University of Nebraska, 1970 football team, champions of the Big 8 Conference, victor in the 1971 Orange Bowl, and picked by the Associated Press, #1 team of the nation.
It's always fun to be #1, but that's history now. The Cornhuskers of Nebraska, last year's National Football College champions, will have to prove it all over again during the 1971 season.
While Nebraska was running up phenomenal scores against its opponents, the University of Oklahoma was doing the same thing. The tension was building for what some sports writers still refer to as the greatest college football game ever played.
Football 1971, the game for #1. Unbeaten and untied Nebraska versus unbeaten and untied Oklahoma. Today, it's the showcase of college football as we look at the #1 ranked team in the nation in the white jerseys, the Cornhuskers from Nebraska, being intercepted by the Sooners of Oklahoma in the crimson jerseys. They are ranked #2. The game to decide who is #1. We have a carnival atmosphere here, ladies and gentlemen, a holiday atmosphere.
You can't imagine the media hype Every time you turn TV on, a game of the century, game of the century. You just say, let's play the thing. I don't care who, let's just play the thing.
The anxiety was real high. Everybody had so much anxiety. They couldn't wait, we couldn't wait, and that last 10 minutes before the game just seemed like an hour. And I stood there on the sidelines, it seemed like forever, and my toes were getting cold. It was kind of a chilly day. And, I can remember my toes are cold. My toes are cold. And I tried to calm myself and get ready and get in and get focused. And we came out just flat.
Nebraska, Jerry Taggy, number 14.
In a big game like that, you never know how you're going to start out. And you've got to get over that initial anxiety to kind of settle down to, okay, let's start playing some football now like we know how to play.
Joe Wiley in to kick. Wiley stands at his own 24, waits for the snap. Rogers deep for Nebraska. Here's Wiley's kick. It's high. It holds up there. Rogers takes the ball at the 30. He's hit and got away. Back upfield to the 35, to the 40. He's to the 45. He's to the 50, to the 45, to the 40, to the 35, to the 20, to the 10. He's all the way home. Holy moly. Man, woman, and child did that. Put him in the aisle. Johnny the Jet Rogers just tore them loose from their shoes.
Part of it being the game of the century in retrospect is that it actually lived up to its billing. It was one heck of a football game. This one had everything. It was just amazing because it's so hard for things to live up to so much hype. It just couldn't be as good as they predicted it would be, and it turned out to be even better.
Touchdown, Nebraska. The clock running, and there is a touchdown, Oklahoma, John Harrison. Look at that move, Jeff Tenure. But Jeff Kenny goes in.
It was really the offensive line that won that game. All I kept doing was just calling Kenny's number. I mean, Jeff was running hard, and he had some nice holes, and the line was getting stronger, and they were getting more determined, and they were having more fun. They started taking control of the line of scrimmage, and when you do that, you got them. And we got them.
With two wings out and him going out now. Taggy, just missed. Again by 96 Hamilton.
Nebraska kept marching down the field, getting closer, and gee, I mean, it was the tension is just unbelievable. And it was a dreary day. I'm standing with my hand in my top coat, and all I'm saying to myself is, "Don't have a heart attack, Fox. I mean, it's just a game. Don't have a stroke. This would be a terrible place to die. So don't get excited."
There's the Rambler. And he moved, Jeff Kenny.
We just kept running the ball, and I talked to Bob, and what do you think? Let's keep giving the ball to Jeff. And he said, go for it, and we did, and we just kept doing it. We just kept doing it.
Into the lead. 34-31. Oh, man, woman, and child, I never thought I would live this long to see this kind of a football game.
And it was such a great game because it lived up to its billing. I mean, there was so much excitement. Johnny Rodgers did his thing. Mildred and Pruitt, they did their things. Jeff Kinney played the best game of his career. Richie Glover played the best game he ever played at middle guard. The competitiveness on the field was exceptional and was great, and the top guys produced on both sides of the ball. So, I mean, it's kind of a wonderful thing to be a part of.
I'm so happy I don't know what to say, cry or laugh or hurt. I can hardly breathe. I'm so happy right now.
I think this here means more to us now than winning the Orange Bowl last year when we were national champions then, because we feel we're national champions right now. Right now. And ain't nobody stopping us. This year, next year either.
For the fans and players, the game of the century was the ultimate in college football. But Devaney still had an old score to settle with his rival, Bear Bryant.
New Year's night, 1972, in the Orange Bowl, the absolute final battle to decide #1 in college football. Nebraska faces a final challenger, Coach Bear Bryant's Alabama Crimson Tide. Observe closely, as you will see the biggest play in this ball game. The Tide's punt by God is received by Johnny Rodgers at the Nebraska 23. Rodgers, dipsy-doodle, faking, and speed is too much for Alabama. It's a 77-yard touchdown run for Nebraska.
It was Devaney's third try at Bear Bryant's Crimson Tide. Jeff Kinney rushed for 99 yards. Jerry Tagge completed 11 of 19 passes for 159 yards. Devaney's Cornhuskers dominated the game, winning 38-6. Devaney had finally gotten the Bear.
After the game, I kidded about it just later. He said, that's the greatest group of football players I ever saw on a football team at one time. Then said, damn thing about the coaches.
He knew he'd hit the epitome of all of his life, and it was against the Bear. His grin was from ear to ear, there's no question about that. He knew he'd had it. When you seen Bob Devaney even want to throw his hat and jump in the air, well, you knew that he was happy, because he never did show that kind of emotion. He was always grinning, but he became a cheerleader with the rest of us.
I remember seeing him, he looked a lot younger after the game. All that stress and worry was gone. He was mission completed. You feel like you're on top of the world. And at that particular night, we were.
You ought to run for something in this state.
I think Devaney is an embodiment of his era in terms of that it was a more personal age versus the impersonality of the 90s. Bob Devaney could have a personal relationship with every player, but the 60s were like that. It wasn't the impersonality of television, telephone. You did talk to people, you did write letters. The force of a personality could really project itself through a program, and I think his did.
Bob Devaney has had an impact on the state of Nebraska since day one he stepped off the train. He made people believe and feel good about themselves. You believed what he said, and you wanted to go out and play for the guy. It wasn't as calculated as things are today. It seemed like it was a different era. It was more fun, and it was more spontaneous and less predictable than probably it is today, and it made it a lot more fun. When you reflect back on those years and what happened to us, there was a building of that tradition, I think, that's carried through to this day. I think it started in '62, and it's continued right through '92, and I'm sure it'll continue far into the future. And it started with Bob, no doubt about that.
Like I say, he was more than just a coach.
It's better to give than to receive. Yes, indeed. 'Tis better to give than to receive. Much better if you want to be forgiven and know the joys of living. 'Tis better to give than to receive.